Feeling as light as a feather, Gale bounded up the steps 4 at a time. A life of hard work had made him rather burly. He wore his usual leather clothes, a sleeveless shirt and pants. Their light hues matched his sandy blonde hair. His arms were covered with scars from the thorns of the thickle. Unlike most of the men in Vendre, he didn't have a beard. Gale slid to a stop in front of the door to the most important room in the castle, the Hunter's Hall. To his surprise, his master, Subotai, stood beside the door. It was odd to see the old hermit here. He usually avoided Vendre completely. He didn't enjoy the attention. Oh, how the people would gawk at seeing the living legend walk among them. The gray fur of Subotai's cloak curled in around the edges. A wooden shoulder pad extended out of the fur cloak. The top of the weathered wood was splintered with countless cuts from the talons of Subotai's bird, Neko, who often perched there. Gale could just make out Subotai's wrinkled face and keen eyes gazing at him from the shadows of the cloak. "I received a summons from the elders," Gale explained. "Do you know what this is about?" The minister nodded. "It's time for your reckoning." "My reckoning?" The reckoning was the final test for an apprentice. To prove that he was worthy of being a warden, he had to complete a quest that even a veteran would find difficult. Many apprentices died during their reckoning. Part of being a warden was living with the risk. Entering the thickle was dangerous, whether you were apprentice or master. "But I thought I wasn't old enough." Generally, an apprentice had to be at least 20 years old to be set on the reckoning. Gale was still 2 years shy of that milestone. "When we travel in the thickle, your eyes notice almost as much as mine. You understand the creatures around us and how to present yourself to them. You know all the common dangers and how to deal with them. You are attuned to the thickle as well as most wardens. Though you are too young, you are certainly strong enough." He sounded as if he were admitting an undeniable truth. "You fight more like a demon than any man I've ever seen." In all the years that Gale had spent as Subotai's apprentice, the Minister of Lore had never given him such a lavish compliment. Subotai placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "All is well, Gale. You mustn't keep the elders waiting." He opened the door behind him and ushered Gale in, but didn't follow. The Hunter's Hall teemed with activity. The stone tables on either side of the room were covered in maps, with wardens leaning over them talking. Most of the men wore beards and kept their long, dark hair tied back. Thick Krayer fur cloaks covered their leather outfits. A large stone table sat at the back of the room. A warden stood before it, his back to Gale. Most of the table's chairs were empty, but 4 of Vendre's elders were present. None of them were quite as old as Subotai, but old age wasn't mandatory for the position. Respect and experience gave these men their authority, especially the one at the head of the table, Bodwin, the pack master himself. As Gale presented himself before the table, Bodwin stood up. The solid brown of his long hair was the exact shade of his Krayer fur cloak. He was the tallest man in the room. No one besides Gale even came close. His hands never seemed to rest at ease. They were always clenched in fists at his side. Even when he smiled, there was something stern about it. But the most imposing thing about him was the way he looked into your eyes when you spoke to him. He never glanced away, even for a second. The ensuing discomfort forced people to lower their eyes in his presence. "You must be kidding me." The familiar voice made Gale glance over to the man standing beside him. It was Tamar. He wasn't a large man, but his name carried renown. He was the youngest person to ever place in the annual marksman's tournament. His black hair and goatee were wavy, and his eyes always carried a look of malice. He was the bane of Gale's existence. Tamar's pride was legendary. It was no secret that he believed he should have been the apprentice to the Minister of Lore. Many people sought the position, even fully trained wardens. But none of them took offense to Gale's good fortune, besides Tamar. Whenever he got the chance, Tamar made Gale look like a joke. Just the other day, Tamar had been making trouble again, telling people that Gale's family was so desperate for money that they had been selling rancid mead. In fact, a single bottle that wasn't corked right had gone bad. When the man brought it back to the market the next day, Adrian apologized, gave him his money back, and even gave the fellow a free bottle to make up for it. It was just like Tamar to use something like that. He had a way of twisting words to say something that was technically true, but put a spin on it to imply a whole array of lies. Now that Gale and Tamar had locked eyes, neither wanted to be the one that wilted under the other's stare. Jaws clenched, they were perfectly still until Bodwin's voice stole their attention. "You are two of the most gifted young men in Vendre. One day, if you prove yourselves worthy, the two of you may even sit together at this table. It's time for this silly rivalry to be at an end. You will be going on your reckoning together." "What?" Gale asked. Working with Tamar wasn't possible. Better to go alone. "Anything but that," Tamar pleaded. "Silence!" Bodwin's command was calm in a dangerous way. Gale and Tamar weren't the only ones to stop talking. The whole room fell silent. "Not 20 minutes ago, a girl went missing near the boundary. The warden caught sight of her limp body being carried away by a wild crayer. The warden confirmed that the crayer was Shinor. In the old tongue, Shinor was the word for tragedy. Everyone in Vendre had heard of Shinor, the infamous wild crayer that had a taste for human meat. Shinor was no ordinary beast. He was a freak of nature, larger, stronger, and faster than any of his kin. With his extraordinary speed, Shinor could easily pierce the boundary that surrounded Vendre, making a meal out of anyone he encountered. The warden couldn't stop him. So far, Shinor had taken 12 lives, and every attempt to kill him had failed. "I now charge you with the task of hunting down and slaying Shinor. Bring back his infamous left ear, which is forked by an old scar, as proof that you have succeeded. You must hurry if you are to catch him." Bodwin pointed to the door and lifted his voice. "Go! Hurry!" Both men nodded, then scurried out the door. Tamar turned to Gale. "Gather your equipment quickly and meet me at Watcher's Bluff." The wind moaned as it swept over Watcher's Bluff, bringing with it an epic mood foreshadowing the journey to come. Tamar was late. Gale looked out over the valley, hoping to spot Tamar. From his perch, Gale had a magnificent view of the city, though the beauty of it was so familiar that he hardly noticed anymore. Vendre sat in the center of a huge valley. The density of the surrounding jungle faltered here because the ground was nearly solid rock. Despite the solid ground, the thickle was not completely deterred. Just a few inches of soil were enough to cover the land with a green blanket of stubborn grasses. The only breaks in this blanket were the streets of Vendre. Tiled with gray granite, they branched out from the main avenue like the veins in a leaf, growing slender and less distinguishable as they reached out to the patchwork of farms in the outer region of the valley. The buildings of the Vendre were made with red stone. They contrasted the vivid greens of their surroundings in a rather pleasant way. The only structures made with the unyielding granite were the castle near the back of the valley, and the fortress peeking out over its walls. The castle was a rather simple design. 4 thick walls reaching up almost 100 feet, lined with square-toothed ramparts. The fortress was a stout tower rising up from the center of the castle. Its shallow pyramid roof was tiled in red stone, as were the railings of its balconies. In the old tongue, Vendre meant City of Vines. It would forever live up to that name. Despite the constant efforts of the people, the tendrils of the ever-hungry thickle were consuming every last building. This mission would have to be fast. The days were getting longer, the sun would soon be at its hottest, and the perpetual mist that covered Vendre would burn off for a short time. The night after this transpired was the only night of the year that the stars would be visible in all their glory, the night of the Starlight Festival. The Starlight Festival was more than a celebration where people gazed upon the stars. It was a night that everyone in the village looked forward to all year. All night long, they would feast, drink, and socialize, because for the next 3 weeks, no one would see anyone outside of their own family. They would all lock their doors and seal themselves in with enough food and water to get them through the flurry. The day after the Starlight Festival, triggered by direct sunlight, the buds that covered the thickle would open and the seasonal flurry would begin. Billions of flowers had just 3 weeks to spread their pollen. The effect was a haze thicker than fog. To breathe the flurry was to choke, gag, and cough endlessly. Taking a walk in the flurry could kill a man. At the Starlight Festival, even the sternest wardens would let their guard down. The women wore their finest smooth leather. The men arrived carrying kegs on their shoulders. Brewing was an art in Vendre. The thickle contained an endless variety of fruits for making wine, and a vast variety of honeys for making mead. And mixing the fruits and honeys produced an infinite variety of melamals. Brewers continuously experimented with their blend to improve the quality of their drink. Recipes were perfected over generations. A family's drink was its signature and its pride. The lighting at the festival was kept to a minimum, making it easier to see the stars. The wardens were at home in the darkness. Their death-defying job involved defending the borders of Vendre in the dark of night. They were accustomed to navigating the darkness by listening and visualizing their surroundings. They didn't need to carry lights with them. Neither did their families. A warden's wife would hold her husband's hand, using him as a guide. The children would hold onto their mother's dress to be sure they wouldn't get separated. The only people who needed light were women who didn't have a man to lead them. They carried a single candle, which illuminated their surroundings just enough for them to see where they were going. It was not uncommon for a young warden to approach a woman he was fond of and offer to guide her during the festival, so that she didn't need to carry a candle. Relationships often started this way. In fact, offering to guide a girl during the festival was taken as a sign of affection. "This year, I will ask her," Gale whispered to himself. Her name was Mara. She had the most noticeable dimples and oh so feminine green eyes. There was something wonderful about the way her long blonde hair curled just a little at the ends, and the way her slender back widened into the curves of her firm behind. The image made him breathe a little deeper. He laughed at himself. Just the thought of her was enough to intoxicate him. Cold steel touched Gale's neck. It was the edge of a blade. A surge of adrenaline was the rude awakening.